The sky over Alaris burned violet with twin suns, their light bouncing off the glass domes that covered the fractured cities of the royal caste. What remained of the once great empire now lay scattered across the desert of the Korat wastes, the sand whispering tales of conquest and collapse. In the palace of the last ruling line, Princess Kilira stared at the horizon from behind polished obsidian windows, her lavender eyes void of expression. They called her the broken heiress. Once destined to unite galaxies with her wisdom and grace, Kilira was now a relic, part legend, part warning. Her empire had fallen to infighting and rebellion, and her family's legacy was a smoldering ruin. Her advisors walked on eggshells, her guards spoke in whispers, and the scientists assigned to repair her spirit never dared to meet her gaze. Because Kilira, despite her genetic perfection and diplomatic training, had shut herself off from everything, including emotion. The crash of her people's pride had buried her ability to dream. Then came the human. Not a diplomat, not a warrior, just a mechanic. Or so he claimed. Corin Hayes arrived under the guise of repairing the crumbling water reclamation units in the palace's lower sectors. The royal maintenance crew didn't question his odd accent or casual attire. The empire had fallen so far that no one double-checked credentials anymore. He saw her on his third day, leaning against the balcony railing, watching the sun bleed into dusk. She noticed him too. Mostly because he was cursing at a floating drone that refused to calibrate. He jabbed a rusted tool into its chassis and shouted something utterly inappropriate for the palace's sacred halls. She didn't laugh, not exactly. But something shifted. The next morning he was back. And so was she. I didn't know palace engineers came in grease-stained uniforms, she said, voice dry. I didn't know royalty still watched peasants work. He shot back, then realized who he was speaking to. Kilira didn't execute him. She tilted her head. You're human. Last I checked. I was told your kind never speak unless spoken to. I was told your kind doesn't feel. Her eyes narrowed, not with offense, but curiosity. From that moment, she kept finding excuses to be near the lower sectors. She claimed it was to inspect the repairs. The staff whispered. No one dared ask questions. For weeks, she watched him fix broken things. Drones, pumps, filtration systems. He did it with a clumsy grace, humming old Terran tunes, sometimes singing them aloud. Lyrics filled with longing and loss and joy she didn't understand. Why do your songs sound sad even when they're happy? She asked him once. Because we remember what it felt like to hurt, and what it felt like to heal. She frowned. That sounds inefficient. He just grinned and tossed her a rag. Try wiping this circuit clean. It'll teach you more about life than any royal tutor ever could. She didn't know why she obeyed. Maybe because, for the first time in years, someone spoke to her like she was more than a symbol. Maybe because she wanted to. One evening, under failing power lights, he handed her an ancient Earth novel, paper-bound and smudged. The Little Prince, she read aloud, puzzled. It's about a boy who lived alone on a planet and asked strange questions. Reminded me of someone. She didn't thank him, but she read it. Twice. Something began to thaw. But Alarian tradition was not so easily undone. Royal conduct codes forbade mingling with off-worlders, especially those of lower function. Kilira's chief steward, an ancient crust of a man named Vyrek, caught wind of their interactions and summoned her. He is beneath you, Vyrek said. No one is beneath me, she answered. He is corrupting the dignity of your house. My house is in ruins. You are the last of your line. Act like it. I am, she said softly, for the first time. That night, guards appeared in the repair sector. Corin wasn't arrested, just escorted to the palace perimeter and told not to return. When Kilira found out, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. But her eyes, for the first time in years, shone with something dangerous. She stormed to the control tower and overrode security with her own DNA signature. Alarms blared. Lights flickered. Return the mechanic, she commanded. The protocol. Return. The mechanic. No one argued. 2 hours later, Corin stood before her again, dirt on his boots, confusion on his face. I didn't think royalty could pull rank over protocols anymore, he said. Neither did I. You okay? No, she said. But I'm not numb either. And she smiled. That was the moment the palace changed. She began to ask questions again, about Earth, about laughter, about choices not made by genetic breeding charts. She walked among the ruins and touched the broken walls herself. She fixed a leaking pipe with her own hands and didn't care that her nails cracked. The staff watched in stunned silence. Rumors spread like fire. The princess was feeling. One evening, as they stood beneath the pulse of the twin moons, she whispered, "Corin, what does it mean to dream?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a small device from his jacket, a projector. With a flick, it painted constellations on the ceiling of the abandoned atrium. "This," he said. "It means seeing more than what is. It means believing in what could be." She stared upward, lips parted. And when she spoke, her voice trembled. "Teach me." Corin didn't know what he had started. At first, it was small, Kilira asking about music or earth customs, fumbling with old Terran idioms, and smirking when she got them wrong. But soon the changes were seismic. The palace, once silent as a tomb, now echoed with cautious laughter, the buzz of revived power grids, and the quiet hum of a princess rediscovering the joy of asking. Why not? She walked differently now. Not like a figurehead, but like someone who wanted to be seen. When she passed the staff, she nodded. Sometimes even smiled. Rumors turned into stories, and stories into hope. Servants no longer feared being dismissed for speaking aloud. Technicians began taking pride in their repairs. The old caste barriers started to blur. It was contagious, the way one girl's awakening rewrote a dying culture's rhythm. But change always invites resistance. A distant branch of the royal lineage, the Varnak Council, watched from their fortress moons with suspicion. They had tolerated Kilira's silence, seeing her as a ghost of the old line. But this awakening threatened their rise. If Kilira reclaimed her birthright not through bloodlines, but by choice, then every self-appointed noble lost legitimacy. They dispatched an emissary, Lord Nereth, tall, skeletal, and draped in ceremonial silk woven with nanothreads. He bowed too deeply, smiled too broadly, and spoke with the oily smoothness of a practiced manipulator. "Your Highness," he said upon arrival, "we are delighted to see you re-engaging with governance. It warms our hearts." Kilira didn't smile. She'd learned by now that not all courtesies were kindness. "Why are you really here, Lord Nereth?" "To support the reformation of Alarian leadership, of course. Your spirit's renewal has inspired us. We wish to help you transition into your proper role." Corin, who had been standing by with a burnt-out energy conduit in his hands, muttered, "That sounds like code for locking you in a velvet cage." Nereth's eyes slid toward him. "And this is your pet mechanic?" Kilira's reply was colder than space. "He is my advisor." That made Nereth pause. "Advisor? How charming." "He fixed more than my water filters," she said. "He fixed what generations of you let rot." The room grew still. After Nereth's departure, Corin turned to her. "That was bold. I'm tired of pretending," she said. "If they want to challenge me, they can do it openly. They might, and they'll come armed. I'll be ready." But readiness wasn't so simple. The Varnak Council began seeding dissent within the palace. A few loyalists vanished. Systems were sabotaged. The food reserves were poisoned. Minor, but enough to cause panic. And Kilira's own guard captain was discovered transmitting encrypted files off-world. "Why?" she asked him when confronted. "You lost your way," he replied, bitter. "Following a human like a pet. You're not one of them. You're more. We are more." "We were," she said. "Now we have a chance to be something better." He spat at her feet. She dismissed him without execution. That decision alone turned more heads than violence ever could. Corin found her in the royal library hours later, surrounded by ancient scrolls and blinking data panels. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But I think that's a good thing." He nodded. "Means you care." Then came the warning from Alarian Spacewatch. A Varnak dreadnought had entered orbit. No diplomatic signal. No envoy. Just silence. Kilira's advisors urged surrender or retreat. "I will not run," she said. "This is still my home." Corin studied the dreadnought schematics with her. It was a massive carrier ship, fully automated, housing swarms of interceptors and cloaked drones. Its purpose was intimidation, and possibly assassination. "What would you do?" she asked Corin. "Humans are good at one thing above all else," he said. "Improvisation." They gathered the remaining palace engineers, guards, and even civilian techs. Corin taught them guerrilla defenses, disguising energy weapons as maintenance nodes, converting old statues into EMP pulse mines, and using the palace's labyrinthine layout to their advantage. "We can't win a war," said one technician. We don't need to, Corin said. We just need to prove we're not easy prey. That Kilira is not alone. She stood with them in every planning session. Gone was the passive figure on the balcony. In her place stood a leader with calloused fingers, dusty robes, and a heart full of unspoken hope. When the Dreadnought's drones finally landed, they expected no resistance. But they found a palace alive with purpose. Corin personally led a trap team through the lower aqueducts. Kilira, against every advisory order, joined the defense grid in the central hall. When the first drone breached the walls, she didn't flinch. She aimed. She fired. And for the first time in recorded history, a princess of Alaris scored a confirmed tactical kill. The defenders pushed back wave after wave. The drones adapted quickly, but so did Corin's traps, redirecting their own signal feeds to confuse targeting systems. Kilira coordinated teams, rerouted power, and even carried the wounded herself. But victory wasn't without cost. The palace walls cracked. Fires consumed ancient halls. And in the chaos, a cloaked interceptor broke through to the control tower. Corin was there. He saw it rise from the shadows, its railgun spinning. And without thinking, he threw himself in front of Kilira. The shot hit. He dropped. Kilira screamed. Time slowed. Her vision tunneled. Somewhere, someone was shouting for medics. But she crawled to his side herself, hands shaking. He was still breathing. Barely. Why? She whispered. Because I believe in you, he rasped. And then his eyes closed. For a heartbeat, her world stopped. But then the anger surged, clean, white-hot. Not rage, but conviction. She rose, blood on her hands, and turned to the communications array. She opened a galaxy-wide broadcast. This is Kilira of Alaris, she said. Daughter of the stars. You've called me broken. You've treated my people as relics. No longer. Today, a human bled for our future. Today, we fight not with legacy, but with truth. If you believe in something more, stand with us. She ended the message and turned toward the final wave of drones. Her people stood behind her. They would not fall without purpose. Not today. And not alone. Kilira stood at the heart of her burning palace, the flames behind her casting molten shadows across the marble floor. Smoke curled from shattered pillars and ruined data consoles. The last wave of Varnak drones was swarming the southern passage now, relentless, silent, devoid of fear. But this time, the princess wasn't waiting behind any line. She was leading it. Behind her, young engineers, stewards, scholars, and guards, all bruised and bloodied, stood shoulder to shoulder. None of them had ever trained for this. And yet not one step back. They had seen a leader rise. They had seen a dream reborn. And that was something worth dying for. Kilira raised her rifle, a clunky fusion weapon cobbled together from spare parts and old war relics. Hold the line, she said, voice calm, steady. We are not ghosts anymore. As the corridor lit with flashes of gunfire and collapsing metal, she didn't flinch. She stepped into the fray like a storm given flesh. In the command center, Corin's body lay on a surgical platform. The medbots worked frantically, removing shrapnel, sealing wounds, pumping in nanites. He had lost too much blood. The palace didn't have the advanced Terran tech to keep him stabilized for long. You better wake up, human, whispered Jorah, the chief engineer, wiping sweat from her brow. We've got enough chaos without you dying like a hero cliché. Corin didn't respond, but his vitals barely held steady. Back at the battlefront, Kilira and her people had repelled the second-to-last wave. Bodies, both machine and organic, littered the corridors. Alarms screeched. Power flickered. And above all of it, the Varnak dreadnought pulsed ominously in the sky, preparing its final strike. Kilira ran back to the atrium, where survivors were regrouping. Status: we lost half the water reserve pumps. The defense grid's collapsing. We've got one shot left before the dreadnought hits atmosphere. She turned to the tactical screen. Can we disrupt its main weapon system? Not from here. We'd need to launch a core burst from inside the upper spire. The problem is... I'll do it. The room fell silent. You can't, said one voice. That tower's unstable. No one's come back from it since the quake. Kilira was already strapping on a reinforced vest. Then I guess I'll be the first. No, came a voice behind her. Weak. Raspy. Corin. He was limping through the doorway, one arm wrapped in synth flesh, the other clutching a support rail. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. Are you insane? She gasped, running to him. Probably, he wheezed. But you're not going up there alone. You're in no condition. I didn't drag myself across 5 corridors just to die in bed. Besides, I owe you one. She stared at him, then nodded. Together they climbed. The upper spire of the palace was a skeleton of its former glory. Cracked walls, broken lifts, debris-strewn stairwells. Wind howled through shattered windows, carrying the dust of forgotten centuries. They moved fast, relying on Kilira's internal knowledge of the palace blueprints and Corin's improvisation to reroute fallen debris and rewire jammed doors. Halfway up, they ran into a Varnak scout, sleek, arachnid-shaped, scanning with infrared. Kilira drew her weapon, but Corin grabbed a fallen ceremonial mirror, angled it with shaking hands, and blinded the drone with a blast of its own deflected laser. Improvisation, he muttered, breathless. You're bleeding again. I'll heal. Eventually, they reached the top chamber. It was a forgotten sanctum, a place once meant for coronations. In the center stood a launch tube, now coated in dust and neglect. But the core burst capsule was still there, dormant, waiting. Kilira moved to the console. Okay, once I initialize the countdown, we'll have 30 seconds before launch. We'll have to manually aim using the tower's rotation, she said. Fine, Corin said. But promise me something. She turned. When this is over, when you win, don't go back to being what they made you. Be more. Her expression was unreadable. Then she nodded once. He smiled. That's my girl. Kilira keyed in the sequence. The tower groaned as ancient systems came online, gears grinding after decades of silence. Outside, the dreadnought's weapon charged, a molten lens preparing to vaporize the palace. The countdown started. 30, 29, 28. They adjusted the coordinates manually, Kilira guiding the targeting interface while Corin stabilized the calibration rings. 15, 14. The dreadnought's energy lens focused. The sky dimmed. Now, Kilira shouted. Corin hit the launch. The capsule burst from the tower with a sound like thunder splitting the world in half. It screamed toward the dreadnought and struck the core port dead on. The sky ignited. The dreadnought exploded in a cascade of fire and debris, raining light over the ruins of the palace. For a moment, the heavens wept stars. Then silence. The tower trembled, foundations breaking apart. Run! Kilira grabbed Corin, pulling him down the stairwell. They made it to the lower levels, just before the spire collapsed behind them. The people of Alaris watched from the courtyard as the dreadnought's remains burned in orbit. Kilira stumbled into view, Corin leaning on her. She looked around and raised a fist. Cheers erupted. Real ones. Joyous. Hopeful. Later, in the council chamber, what was left of it, Kilira stood before the people. Not as a princess, but as one of them. We have seen what legacy brings, she said. Now we choose a new path. A path not dictated by bloodlines, but by unity, action, and dreams. She looked to Corin, seated beside the other survivors. I once believed I was broken, but I wasn't. I was waiting to remember how to hope. The room was still. Then someone clapped. Then more. Then the chamber roared. In the weeks that followed, the palace became more than a relic. It became a school, a workshop, a sanctuary. The caste barriers dissolved. Kilira led not as ruler, but guide. And Corin, after recovering, became her partner in all things. One evening, as they watched the twin moons rise, Kilira rested her head on Corin's shoulder. You taught me to dream, she said. You taught yourself, he whispered. I just handed you the stars. She smiled, and for the first time, the stars smiled back.